Okay. In 1808, Jefferson states that he's not seeking a third term, and so Madison is going to run for president as well as Monroe. These will be the Republicans. They will run against Pinckney again. However, Pinckney doesn't win. He does better this time, but Madison and Monroe are going to do this. The Republicans, however, at this point are going to control most of the states in this election. Okay? In 1810, the attacks on American shipping continue, both the French and the British. 1810, the Non-Intercourse Act is supposed to expire, the one that Madison had introduced. Congress will replace it with a new law. This law will permit trade with the first of the powers, either England or France, who vows to stop seizing American ships and impressing our sailors. Well, Napoleon jumps at the opportunity to have an open supply chain, so he promises to stop seizing American ships and impressing the sailors. And so Madison informs England that the embargo is back on England, unless England wants to promise not to seize our ships, and then we will start trading with England again also. In reality, Madison is trying to tell England and France, if you want to trade with us, you've got to have us trading with both. England reluctantly agrees so that they can get materials, but as soon as the act takes place, neither side stops the seizures, stops the impressments. Both the French and the British continue to seize American ships, and Madison is forced to put the embargo back on both England and France. The country seems to be on the verge of war with everybody, but who? Who? England, France? I mean, there's a big question. Many people believe that another war would finish us off, that it would be all that we could stand. 1811, the election of 1810. 1811 brings a new Congress to the House of Representatives. Madison's embargo is ready to take effect. Some of these young men who are coming to Congress now from the West and the South, they're ready for some payback. They're ready to basically pay back all of these countries that have been abusing the United States up to this point. They're usually referred in your text as the war hawks. People like Henry Clay from Kentucky and John C. Calhoun from South Carolina. Okay? These guys call themselves Republicans, but they're a new breed of Republicans. These guys believe the U.S. needs to be strong against its enemies abroad. They look to Jefferson's example when Jefferson sent the Marines to the Barbary coast in the Mediterranean. They see that as the kind of Republicans they are. These two guys, for example, this is the advent of photographic experience for these guys. Now, the pictures of these guys are from the 1850s, 1840s, 1850s. However, their political careers start in the 18-teens. This is John C. Calhoun from Kentucky. He's usually referred to as the Great Compromiser. I know here he kind of looks like the Crypt Keeper from Tales from the Crypt. And then you've got John C. Calhoun, quite the scary fellow, he kind of looks like the Heat Miser, a little bit like the Heat Miser, and he's scary. Just look at the eyes. Look at his eyes. It's almost as if he's coming after you. He wants to get you. We'll just put him away for the moment. These guys are ready for trouble. They're ready for war. And who are they ready to go to war with? It's as if they don't care. They're just ready for a war. Now, Indian troubles in the West. We are continuing to move west. Okay, our manifest destiny. The Indians start renewing their ties with the British fur traders. And the British start bringing them supplies, materials, and weapons. If we have war with England, this could be a problem for us, having all of their allies on our western frontiers. In 1805, William Henry Harrison was appointed the territorial governor of Indiana. in the middle of where all of this Indian upheaval is taking place. He is going to attempt to negotiate treaties with the native tribes in the region to try to get them to surrender land. They will sell land to us, and they'll move somewhere else, and we'll bring settlers into the region. Except when Harrison attempts to do this, he does it what would be considered unfairly. He'll trade with this tribe, but not with this tribe, and trade with this tribe, but not with this tribe. He attempts to keep these tribes pitted against each other, showing some favor and showing some no favor at all. It's hard to carry out, but he's trying to keep them from consolidating. You can sort of see the map of the areas that are conceded prior to his advent there. And you can see sort of how it makes like a wagon wheel kind of patchwork. Two of the leaders of the Shawnee in this region, Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa. Tecumseh is a chief. Tenskwatawa is a shaman, medicine man, whatever term you want to use. Sort of their religious leader. Okay, both of these individuals had connections with the British military. Both of them had actually served as scouts in the British military. Tenskwatawa actually awarded that's a Medal of Valor from his service with the British Army. Now, Tecumseh believes this idea that what Harrison's asking them to do violates everything the Indians believe in. No Indian can sell land, Tecumseh says. The land is held in common by all the tribes. They believe it would be as if the flea were trying to sell the dog upon which he lives. In 1809, Harrison calls the chiefs of the Potawatomi, the Miami, and the Delaware tribes to come to Fort Wayne to negotiate a land deal. Okay, Tecumseh is out of town. Tecumseh has gone west. He's gone to talk to as far as the Lakota Sioux. He's gone to talk to these people, see if we can get them to come back and help in this confederation to drive these people off of their land. While he's gone, Madison tells Harrison to make sure these tribes are represented. Madison doesn't want this to blow up in our face. Harrison, however, pulls a fast one. He purchases land from these chiefs that these chiefs don't even have claim to. He buys 3 million acres for 2 cents an acre. And so for as far as these chiefs were concerned, that was good money, especially considering the fact that they don't own the land. When Tecumseh gets home, he's furious. He goes back out west to bring his newly formed confederation to the east to start to fight. And so he tells his brother to stay in Prophetstown right here on the sort of very close to the convergent of the Wabash and Tippecanoe rivers. He tells him to avoid conflict until I get back. And so Tecumseh heads west. Okay, Harrison marches from Fort Wayne with 1,000 men towards the Tippecanoe River, and they camp out there outside Prophetstown. That night, Tenskwatawa, who is the medicine man, the shaman, he has a dream. In this dream, he sees himself leading this group of natives, attacking Harrison and his men and driving them back into the ocean. And as they're having victory, the fallen Indians rise from the earth and they help to drive these people back into the ocean. When Tenskwatawa awakes, he's ready to attack. This was a bad plan. Tenskwatawa is going to attack these guys at the Tippecanoe River. It's going to fail miserably. They will be driven away. Tenskwatawa will be killed, and Prophetstown will be burned. Harrison gets his nickname that he uses in his presidential election, Old Tippecanoe and Tyler too. They refer to Harrison as Old Tippecanoe. When Tecumseh gets back, Tecumseh's ready to fight. And he won't have much problem finding allies, the British, to agree with him. Now, The war hawks had been pushing for war with everybody. It seemed they didn't care. They were from the west and the south. They were also very expansionistic. They wanted that land, that territory in those regions. The Indians in the west, along with the British, are becoming very problematic. We also start looking towards Spanish Florida as an avenue to expand our country. And we even threaten parts of Canada. However, every time we do threaten parts of Canada, it turns out badly for us. It turns out very badly. So, John C. Calhoun gets himself on the Foreign Relations Committee. He will quadruple the size of the Army to increase the number of people that will be serving. New England Federalists refuse to endorse these war preparations. Why? Simply because they don't want a war. The Federalists see themselves as being staunch allies with the English. However, by June the 12th, Congress declares war on England, and it falls down on sectional lines. New England and the Mid-Atlantic are strongly against it. However, the South and the West are strongly for it. So the War of 1812 begins. Our first act in the War of 1812 is we invade Canada. The election of 1812, Madison wins. However, he wins by less than he had before. 1812, 1813, the tide starts to turn in our favor. We do attack what is the modern city of Toronto called York, and we burn its capital. Admiral Perry is going to win an astonishing defeat against the British fleet in Lake Erie, which is going to help solidify Admiral Perry's reputation. And in 1813, at the Battle of the Thames, Tecumseh is leading his confederation against the Americans, and Tecumseh will be killed in this battle. Once Tecumseh is killed in this battle at the Thames, the confederation that he had put together falls apart. It was as if he was the one holding it together. And so things start to fall apart for the British and their allies early on. Okay? And then Andrew Jackson is in the South. Andrew Jackson, leading 2,500 Tennesseans, are attacking the Creek Indians, who are allies of the British. In 1814, the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, they kill over 550 Indians in this one battle. Most of them are actually women and children. When they attack the village, most of the young men have gone to serve with the British Army, but Jackson orders his men to completely wipe out the village and burn it to the ground. As the war is progressing, there's three primary attempts for the British to form a beachhead, to form a place where they can land troops en masse. The first is going to be in the Great Lakes, where they have decisively beaten. The second is over here when they try to come into the Chesapeake Bay, which again they'll be beaten. And the last ditch effort that they're going to do is they're going to try to land troops in New Orleans to have a port that's large enough to offload supplies and soldiers. Okay, that's basically the War of 1812 in a nutshell. The two big heroes on the American side, Admiral Perry and Andrew Jackson. We can decide if Andrew Jackson is a hero in a few minutes. Now, the British are going to attempt some offensives in 1814. British ships sail into the Chesapeake Bay, which is where Washington, D.C. is. The people in Washington freak out. The Declaration of Independence is saved, according to the mythology, but in reality, the Declaration of Independence isn't in danger. But Dolly Madison does save George Washington's portrait from the White House, which is burning. She runs into a burning White House and saves the portrait of George Washington. 5,000 troops land in Washington, D.C. They do burn the White House, probably in retaliation for what the Americans did to Trent, the capital in what we call today Toronto, which was York back then. However, they don't try to hold Washington. Washington's not what they want. The port in Washington is not large enough to sustain what they want to do. They're going to sail on up the Chesapeake Bay into Baltimore Harbor. Now, the 5,000-man army is going to march towards Baltimore, and the Navy is going to sail towards Baltimore. And that's how they're going to attack Baltimore, to try to take the port of Baltimore. Fort McHenry and the Maryland militia are the only two things that stand in their way. And fortunately, the Maryland militia distinguishes itself as a fighting force and holds back the British troops. And Fort McHenry, well, Fort McHenry holds its own against this entire British fleet that has come to attack. Francis Scott Key, a local doctor, hears that there are wounded Americans, prisoners of war, on one of these ships. He gets his doctor's bag and rows out to the ship. When he gets there, he finds there are no wounded soldiers, and he is arrested as a spy. He will stand on the deck of the ship and watch the bombardment of Baltimore Harbor. Okay, it's from this vantage point that he writes the Star-Spangled Banner. And as the song says, and in the morning, the American flag is still flying, and as the flag is flying, they realize that the fort has not fallen. The harbor is still protected. Eventually, between the army and the fort, the British Army are going to pull out. They don't want to expend the resources necessary to take Baltimore Harbor. Probably because they got bigger fish to fry back in Europe with little Napoleon. Now, this is a nice picture of Fort McHenry with the great big giant flag that flies over it. This fort was one of the forts that was built when John Adams was attempting to secure our coastal defenses. Adams believed that if these British and French are willing to attack our ships in our waters, at some point they're going to be brazen enough to attack our coastal cities. And he was right. Fortunately for us, he started building these forts that could defend these coastal cities. Now, Britain will have other offensives. September 1418, they started to march on New York from Canada. Very bad plan, many blunders. They eventually turn back and go back to Canada. Their last-ditch effort is to land a large British army in Louisiana. By doing this, they hope to secure the New Orleans harbor so that they can start landing troops and they can start invading to reconquer their former colony. Andrew Jackson is in New Orleans. Andrew Jackson has no more gunpowder. He's got no more flints. He's got no more musket balls. He's got no cannon. But he's got a few thousand men who are essentially unarmed. The British know that he has no weapons, that he has no gunpowder. So the British feel like they're just going to walk in. Little do the British know that a pirate named Jean Lafitte, approaches Jackson and declares, "I am an American. Even though I'm French, I am an American. I have never attacked an American ship. Even though I'm labeled a pirate, I have never attacked an American ship." And for a pardon, he says he's willing to give Jackson as much gunpowder and cannon and ball and shot as much as he can use and more. So Jackson makes a deal with Jean Lafitte. And when the British offload, they don't offload tactically. They offload as if they're going to a parade. They offload in mass and they start marching up the dock. They start marching up the harbor. Jackson and his men stay hidden until the majority of the forces are in the kill zone. And Jackson's forces, when they open up, they kill between 2,000 and 3,000 of the 4,000 British soldiers that landed. It is a bloodbath. Of course, the British thought he was unarmed. They didn't believe he had the weapons. And so the Battle of New Orleans, this glorious victory in 1815, solidifies Andrew Jackson's name in the history as a hero of the Great Battle of New Orleans. However, the treaty that ended the war was signed in December 1814. But it was signed on the other side of the Atlantic, the Treaty of Ghent. So technically, the Battle of New Orleans didn't have to be fought. It didn't have to be fought. The problem is, well, in Jackson's defense, which I don't actually do very often, in Jackson's defense, if the British had taken New Orleans and then news of the treaty being signed, would the British have given back New Orleans, or would they've maintained control over this important city on this continent? Most people think that the British would have maintained control of the port of New Orleans, forcing the Americans to deal with them if they wanted to trade. So this Battle of New Orleans is over. Now, the war ends. The Treaty of Ghent, signed in 1814. No real winners. There are no real winners. The British give up all of its western forts and they stop giving aid to the Indians. We give up the issue of impressments, all the sailors that have been impressed, and we give up any claims to Canada. There are losers, however, big losers in this issue. The New England Federalists feel the sting of defeat for sure. The New England Federalists had started losing their political power. So in December 1814, they meet in Hartford, Connecticut to discuss what to do to regain their power base. They discuss even to the point of seceding from the Union. They discuss in 1814 to no longer be New England and going back to being Old England, joining with the British to fight the Americans, these Federalists did. They proposed constitutional amendments to protect their power, and if all that fails, then we shall move towards secession. All of these attempts to decrease the Southern power base and to stop these states from being created. As their convention breaks up, two things happen, and they happen in this order. Number one, news of the glorious victory of New Orleans, Andrew Jackson's glorious victory. And problem number two, the news of the treaty arrives. Now, the treaty arrives after Andrew Jackson defeats the British. So, Andrew Jackson ended the War of 1812. Well, that's how it's going to look. Andrew Jackson will be credited with this idea that he has ended the War of 1812 with this glorious victory in New Orleans. At this point, once all of this comes out, once everything that comes out that the Federalists were attempting to do as a result of this conflict, these Federalists start losing their political clout. This right here, they never recover from. The Federalist Party, as we would call it, the Federalist Party, are going to lose everything, and they will no longer be a force to be reckoned with at all in this arena. So, that's the War of 1812. In Madison's presidency, we'll get ready to talk about the end of Madison's presidency and the beginnings of Monroe, and then we will get ready to move on to the age of Jackson. So we'll talk to you guys later.